The diner buzzed with its usual morning rhythm, the soft clink of dishes, low chatter of early customers, and the comforting smell of freshly brewed coffee. Right at the center of it all was Emily, a young woman whose smile was as warm as the sun rising outside. At just 26, Emily was more than just a waitress. She was the heart and soul of the place. With her calming voice and caring attitude, she made people feel welcome the moment they walked in. Regulars knew her by name, and newcomers never forgot her face. But behind her bright smile was a life full of quiet struggle. Emily had been supporting her family ever since her father passed away. Her mother's health had declined soon after, and Emily, the eldest of 3 siblings, had stepped into the role of provider. She worked full-time at the diner while taking college classes at night, scraping together every penny to pay bills, buy medicine, and help her younger siblings stay in school. She never complained. Even when exhaustion tugged at her, even when her shoes were worn thin and her back ached, she kept going. Her kindness never wavered. Her smile never cracked. One crisp October morning, as Emily restocked the sugar and refilled coffee pots, the front door opened with a soft jingle. In stepped an elderly man she didn't recognize. He looked to be in his early 70s, dressed in a frayed coat and scuffed shoes. His old leather bag hung off his shoulder, and his hat sat slightly crooked on his head. There was a quiet, gentle uncertainty in his eyes as he scanned the room. Emily walked over with her trademark warmth. "Good morning, sir. Would you like a booth or a seat at the counter?" The man smiled politely. "A booth, if that's all right." "Of course," Emily said, leading him to a seat near the window. "Can I get you a coffee while you look over the menu?" He nodded. "Just coffee for now." "Thank you." As she poured his drink, Emily found herself glancing back at him. Something about him stood out, not just his appearance, but the calm way he carried himself, like he didn't quite belong there but wasn't lost either. What Emily didn't know was that the man, Walter, was not what he appeared to be. Beneath the worn coat and quiet demeanor was a man of wealth. Walter had once owned several businesses, and even now lived a life of luxury, but he had grown weary of it, tired of shallow people chasing him for money, tired of fake kindness and hollow words. Walter had decided to test the world in his own way. He disguised himself as someone with nothing, hoping to find someone with true compassion, someone who would offer kindness not because of what he had, but despite what he didn't. As Emily returned with his coffee, Walter cleared his throat. "Miss," he said gently, "may I ask for something a little unusual?" "Of course," she replied. "Go ahead." "I don't have much on me today," he said, opening his tattered wallet. "Would it be all right if I had a small meal? I can come back to pay, I promise." Emily paused, just briefly. It wasn't common for strangers to ask for food on credit. But looking into his eyes, she didn't see a lie. She saw something fragile, something genuine. And that was all she needed. She smiled softly. "Don't worry about it, sir. I'll bring you something warm. It's on the house." Walter blinked, caught off guard. Then he nodded slowly. "Thank you. That's very kind of you." Emily turned and walked back toward the kitchen, her heart light. She didn't have much, but she knew what it felt like to need help, and she believed in giving what little she could. From his booth, Walter watched her closely. He saw how she treated every customer, rich or poor, rude or kind, with the same grace. He saw the way she offered warmth without expecting anything in return. And in that moment, he realized he had found someone truly rare. As she placed the plate in front of him, Walter smiled softly. But in his mind, he was already making plans to return. Because what Emily didn't know was that her simple act of kindness had just changed the course of her life. Walter returned the next morning, once again cloaked in his disguise, the same frayed jacket, a faded old cap shadowing his face, and the unshaven stubble that disguised the truth of who he really was. His steps were cautious as he entered, as if unfamiliar with the morning bustle of the small-town diner. The usual morning crowd was already filling the booths and bar stools, but no one gave him much notice. That suited Walter just fine. He slipped quietly into a corner booth, tucked near the window, where he could watch without being watched. Moments later, Emily spotted him. "Good morning, sir," she greeted him, her voice cheerful and warm. "Nice to see you again. Would you like the usual coffee?" Walter nodded, his expression a bit more reserved than the day before. As Emily moved away to get his drink, Walter took a slow breath. For a man used to high-stakes boardrooms and multi-million-dollar decisions, it was strange how nervous this moment made him. But this wasn't about business. This was about something far more real. Kindness. And the idea that someone might show it simply because it was the right thing to do, well, that made his heart beat just a little faster. Emily returned with the coffee, placing it gently in front of him. "Is there anything else I can get you today?" Walter hesitated, fidgeting slightly. "Actually," he said, glancing around the room as if embarrassed, "I was wondering if I might get a small breakfast today. I don't really have the money right now." For the briefest second, Emily's eyes flickered with surprise. Most people didn't admit that kind of thing, not openly, especially in a place this modest. But rather than pulling away, her expression softened. She thought of her own life, the long nights, the bills, the pressure, the strangers who had once helped her without asking for anything in return. "That's no problem at all," she said, her smile as genuine as ever. "I'll take care of it. What would you like?" Walter's face shifted with something between gratitude and disbelief. He looked up at her, eyes filled with something unspoken. "Just a simple breakfast, please. Eggs and toast would be more than enough." "You got it," Emily replied, and with a reassuring nod, she walked off toward the kitchen. What Walter didn't know was that Emily had just paid for his meal out of her own tip money. Again, it wasn't much, but to her, every dollar mattered. Even so, she didn't hesitate. She didn't dwell. Instead, she focused on the small good she could do, and that was enough for her. Walter watched her quietly as she worked the floor. The way she spoke to people, always with patience, always with kindness, it struck something deep in him. There was no act here, no performance. This wasn't the kind of smile someone wore for a tip. This was someone who genuinely cared. When she returned with his breakfast, he looked up, a little choked up. "Thank you, miss," he said, his voice softer than before. "I don't really know how to thank you." Emily waved a hand, brushing it off. "Don't worry about it," she said gently. "We all need help sometimes. Enjoy your breakfast." As Walter quietly ate, he kept observing her. She chatted with an elderly couple, helped a family juggling noisy toddlers, even took a moment to listen to a young man complain about his morning. She did it all with grace, as if each interaction, no matter how small, mattered. And to her, they did. Walter sat back, finished his food, and lingered for a moment, thoughtful. He had expected polite kindness, maybe a little sympathy. What he hadn't expected was sacrifice. She had paid for him, not just in gesture, but with her own earnings. And it made him wonder just how much she was carrying on those young shoulders. As he stood to leave, he caught her eye across the room. He gave her a nod, simple, quiet, meaningful. She returned the smile and went back to wiping down the counter, thinking little more of it. Because to Emily, this was just part of the day. But to Walter, it was something far more powerful. Over the next few days, Walter kept coming back. Each time, he changed up his appearance just a bit. A different old hat, a faded coat, once even adding a slight limp to appear more vulnerable. Each time, he asked for something small, a slice of pie, a refill of coffee, a warm meal. Each time, Emily responded with the same kindness. No questions, no judgment, just warmth. He started noticing things. The way some of her coworkers whispered about him. The curious looks. The quiet disapproval. One afternoon, another waitress leaned in as Emily passed by and said under her breath, "Why do you keep doing that? You know he can't pay you back, right?" Emily didn't flinch. She simply smiled, her eyes calm. "I don't do it expecting anything in return," she said. Sometimes, making someone's day a little better is reason enough. Everyone's fighting their own battles. A little kindness can go a long way. The waitress shook her head, unconvinced. But Walter, sitting nearby and overhearing it all, felt a pang deep in his chest, a strange mix of admiration and guilt. This woman had no idea who he truly was. And yet, she gave without hesitation, without expectation. Because for Emily, kindness wasn't something you earned. It was something you gave, even if it cost you something. It was an attitude Walter had seen so rarely in the world he came from, a world steeped in luxury, status, and cold ambition. In that world, people often forgot what it meant to truly care for someone without expecting anything in return. But Emily, she was different. That night, as Walter left the diner under the dim glow of the streetlights, he carried with him something he hadn't felt in years: respect. Real respect. Emily had proven, again and again, that her kindness wasn't a show. It wasn't performative. It wasn't something she did when it was easy or convenient. It was part of her. Unshakable, even when it cost her something. He had come to test her. But somewhere along the way, he had begun to admire her. The young waitress who had unknowingly become the subject of his quiet experiment had just taught him more about human goodness and inner strength than all his years in high society ever had. That night, Walter made a decision. The experiment was coming to an end, but not because she had failed, because she had passed with a grace that humbled him. Now, it was time to show her who he really was, and thank her in a way that truly meant something. Over the next few days, Walter continued to visit the diner, always in disguise, always adding a new detail to deepen the illusion. A tattered scarf, worn shoes, a coat with frayed edges and patches sewn in by hand. By the end of the week, he looked like someone who had been struggling for years. He sat in the same booth each time, the quiet one in the corner, and watched Emily move with her usual lightness through the morning rush. She greeted each customer with the same warm smile, no matter how tired she was or how long her shift had been. She never seemed to slow down, never seemed to lose her gentle nature. With every visit, Walter asked for small favors, nothing big, just enough to gauge how far her compassion would go. One day, it was a slice of bread and a glass of water. Another day, he simply asked if he could sit for a while to rest his legs. Emily never turned him away. Not once. She treated him as she treated everyone, like a human being who mattered. One morning, as Walter quietly stirred his coffee, he overheard two servers near the kitchen whispering. "Why does she keep helping that guy?" one asked, her voice edged with irritation. "He's clearly just taking advantage. She barely makes enough as it is." "Right," the other one replied. "I would have shut him down by now. She's too soft." Walter felt a tightness in his chest. He had never meant to bring that kind of scrutiny upon her. For a brief moment, he thought about ending it all, dropping the act, walking out, never coming back. But he needed to understand, would her kindness hold up even now, under pressure? Would it crack? On his fifth visit, Walter decided to ask for something different, more personal. As Emily brought him his modest breakfast, he looked up, eyes uncertain. "I'm really sorry to ask this, miss," he said quietly, "but would you happen to have a couple dollars you could spare? I need to get some medicine." Emily paused. Asking for food was one thing. Money was another, and she had very little of it to begin with. Her fingers curled slightly around the cash in her apron, tips she had worked hard to earn. Bills were due. Her mother's prescriptions were piling up again. She couldn't afford to be careless. But then she looked at him. There was no manipulation in his eyes. Just need. With a quiet breath, Emily reached into her jar and pulled out a few folded dollars. She placed them in his hand and offered a soft smile. "It's not much," she said, "but I hope it helps." Walter was stunned. She had every reason to say no. Every excuse would have been valid. She owed him nothing. And still, she gave, because that's who she was. Her kindness wasn't about convenience. It was conviction, a part of her, stitched deep into her soul. The following day, her co-workers didn't hold back. "Emily," one of the waitresses said as they cleared tables, "why do you keep doing this? You know he's not going to pay you back. He's just using you." Emily paused, setting down the plate she was holding. "Maybe he is," she replied softly. "But maybe he's not." Her colleague rolled her eyes. "Yeah, but you're the one who's struggling. You're working double shifts, skipping meals, and handing out free food like you're made of money." Emily gave a faint smile. "I know I don't have much, but I do have the choice to be kind. I know what it's like to feel invisible. I know what it's like to need help and not know where to turn. So if I can make his day a little easier, even just for a moment, then that's enough for me." Walter, seated in his usual booth, overheard every word. His throat tightened. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know this was a test. She didn't even know he was listening. But her compassion, it had no audience. That's how he knew it was real. Day after day, he returned. Sometimes for a sandwich, sometimes just to sit quietly and rest. Each time, Emily treated him with the same warmth and patience, even when her tips were slim and her own worries piled up. To her, he wasn't a nuisance. He was a person, and that was all he needed to be. One evening, after the last table had been cleared and the lights inside the diner had dimmed, Walter approached her, leaning slightly on the cane he had added to his disguise. "Thank you for everything," he said quietly, emotion threading through his voice. "You've been very kind." Emily offered her usual smile, brushing it off. "It's nothing, really. I'm just glad I could help." But for Walter, it was everything. He had seen the world, boardrooms, mansions, parties full of people with shallow hearts and hollow intentions. But this small-town waitress, she had changed him, because in her, he had found what he didn't even know he was searching for. A rare heart that gave without hesitation. A soul that valued people, not appearances. And a kindness that expected nothing, yet gave everything. As Walter stepped out of the diner that night and into the quiet air, he knew it was time to return, not as a man in the worn coat, but as himself, and finally give Emily the recognition and the life-changing surprise she so deeply deserved. Walter had spent the night deep in thought. The cold autumn air outside the diner had little effect on him, not compared to the storm of emotion swirling in his chest. He had come here to test a stranger, but what he found in Emily was no ordinary kindness. It was something rare, something steady, something real. The next morning, Walter walked back into the diner in full disguise, the same frayed coat, worn shoes, an old cap pulled low over his eyes. His unshaven look gave him the appearance of a man who hadn't caught a break in years. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered, and the familiar hum of morning chatter filled the room. He moved quietly to his usual corner booth, unnoticed by most except one. Emily spotted him instantly. She gave a small smile, not the polite kind reserved for customers, but a genuine one, like seeing someone you've grown to care about. "Morning, sir," she said warmly as he approached. "The usual coffee?" Walter nodded, quieter than usual. As Emily walked away, he leaned back in the booth, letting his eyes follow her. The way she moved through the diner, graceful, grounded, kind, made it almost impossible to believe how much she carried on her shoulders. Moments later, she returned with a steaming mug and placed it gently in front of him. "Anything else today?" she asked with that same patient smile. Walter hesitated. "I was wondering," he said, lowering his voice, "if I might trouble you for a little breakfast today. I'm afraid I still don't have much money." Emily paused just slightly. It wasn't the first time he'd asked for a free meal, but today the request came with something more, a quiet tremble, a trace of shame. She looked into his eyes and saw not manipulation, but need, and without skipping a beat, she nodded. "Of course. Eggs and toast again." "Yes, please," he said softly, his voice tinged with both gratitude and disbelief. As she walked toward the kitchen, Walter sat in silence, watching her. He couldn't help but notice how her coworkers glanced at her, the side glances, the raised brows. They were noticing, too. One of them even muttered just loud enough for him to hear, "She's still feeding that guy? How many times now?" But Emily didn't flinch. She moved with purpose, sliding the order into the kitchen window, never breaking that calm, kind rhythm she carried. Minutes later, she returned and set the plate gently in front of him. "Here you go, fresh off the grill." Walter looked up. "Thank you," he said, a little more earnestly than before. "Really?" Emily shrugged with a soft smile. "Don't mention it. We all need a little help sometimes." As Walter ate slowly, he kept watching. She wasn't just nice to him, she was kind to everyone. A grumpy man who complained about his eggs. A tired mother wrangling 3 loud kids. An elderly woman who asked the same question 3 times. Emily treated them all with the same quiet respect. And then came the moment that caught him off guard. When his plate was nearly empty, he leaned slightly forward and spoke softly. "Miss, I know this is a lot to ask, but I need to buy some medicine. I'm a few dollars short. Would you Have anything to spare?" There it was, the line he wasn't sure he should cross. As soon as he said it, he saw it, the flicker of hesitation in Emily's eyes. She shifted, her hand brushing the pocket where her tip money sat folded and tight. Walter saw the calculation flicker across her face. Rent, groceries, her mother's prescriptions. She had every reason to say no. But instead, she took a breath, reached into her apron, and pressed a few crumpled bills into his hand. "It's not much," she said softly, "but I hope it helps." Walter swallowed hard. The bills felt heavier than they should have, not because of the money, but because of what they represented. She had nothing to gain from this. He had nothing to offer. And yet, she gave. The next day, the whispers got louder. Another waitress confronted her near the kitchen as they wiped down tables. "Emily, seriously, why are you doing this?" she asked with clear frustration. "You know he's not going to pay you back. You can't afford to keep feeding this guy." Emily set down her rag and looked her coworker in the eye. "Maybe he is taking advantage," she said gently. "But maybe he really does need help. I'd rather give and be wrong than look away when someone needed me." Her coworker scoffed. "You're the one struggling. Em, not him. You can't save everyone." "I'm not trying to," Emily said, her voice steady now. "But I can choose to be kind. That's mine to give." Walter heard it all. He sat frozen in his booth, coffee untouched, heart pounding. She wasn't defending him because she knew him. She was defending the idea of kindness itself. He couldn't believe it, even under judgment, even when it cost her, even when no one was watching. Emily still chose grace. Emily had never imagined something like this, not even in her wildest dreams. For so long, the burden of keeping her family afloat had weighed on her like an invisible anchor. The endless double shifts, the silent nights spent worrying about rent and medicine, all of it had become part of her daily survival. And now, with just a few heartfelt words in 2 small envelopes, Walter had begun to lift that weight. In an instant, he was giving her something she hadn't felt in years, room to breathe. But Walter wasn't finished. As Emily sat in stunned silence, he gently placed a second envelope on the table, his expression full of warmth and quiet conviction. "There's something else," he said. "I see a future in you, Emily. You're compassionate, hard-working, and resilient. I'd like to offer you a position in my company, a real opportunity to grow, to learn, and to build something meaningful, a career that reflects the strength I've seen in you." The words settled over her like a wave. Emily stared at him, her lips parted slightly, her eyes wide with disbelief. Around her, the clatter of coffee cups and diner conversation blurred into a distant hum. This moment felt suspended in time, too big, too sudden to grasp. A job," she finally managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know what to say. I never expected anything like this." Walter reached across the table and gently rested his hand over Hayes. His eyes were kind, sincere. "You don't have to say anything. You earned this, every bit of it, with your heart, your grit, your kindness, especially when you had every reason not to give." Tears welled in Emily's eyes and spilled down her cheeks, uncontained. For the first time in years, she felt something powerful take root inside her. Hope, real, solid, tangible hope that maybe, just maybe, her life could finally change, that her family could find peace, that her sacrifices had meant something after all. Walter stood slowly and offered her a warm smile as he adjusted his coat. "Take your time with the decision," he said gently. "But know this, whatever you choose, I'll be here to support you." Then, without fanfare, he turned and walked out of the diner. Heads turned. The other waitstaff and customers watched him leave, still processing what had just happened. Emily sat quietly at the booth, staring down at the 2 envelopes in front of her. Her hands trembled slightly. Her heart raced. It felt like a dream. But as she looked around, at the worn linoleum floors, the familiar faces of co-workers and customers, she realized this was real. Her life had shifted in an instant, all because of a stranger who had seen past her apron and tired smile, and into the heart that never stopped giving. That evening, when Emily shared the news with her family, their small living room filled with stunned silence, then joyful sobs. Her mother clutched her hand with trembling fingers. Her little brother stayed in awe, speechless. The weight of financial struggle that had defined so much of their lives was finally lifting. From that moment forward, Emily was determined to carry forward the kindness she had received, to become a light for others, just as Walter had been for her. With her debts cleared and her family finally steady, Emily threw herself into a future with new fire. She completed her college education in business management, a field she chose with purpose, honoring the opportunity Walter had given her. She studied hard, often staying up late with textbooks and notepads, driven by the same quiet determination that once carried her through those early diner mornings. When she graduated, Walter welcomed her into his company with open arms. He placed her in a management training program, where she worked closely under his mentorship. Emily flourished. She treated everyone, from executives to janitorial staff, with the same warmth and respect she'd once offered customers. Her journey from diner server to corporate professional shaped how she led, with empathy, humility, and authenticity. The same values that once made her stand out in a small-town diner now made her irreplaceable in the company. But Emily never forgot where she came from. As she grew into her new role, she began looking for ways to give back. Inspired by Walter's generosity, she started small, helping co-workers, offering support to anyone facing challenges, lending an aid to those feeling overwhelmed. Her quiet kindness began to ripple throughout the office. With Walter's full support, she launched a charitable fund through the company, aimed at helping those in the same shoes she once wore. Students drowning in debt, families barely getting by, people holding on to hope by a thread. The fund provided education support, emergency aid, and career development resources. Together, Emily and Walter expanded their efforts beyond the workplace. They organized monthly outreach events across the city, food drives, winter clothing giveaways, financial literacy workshops. They brought hope to neighborhoods long forgotten by the world, reminding people that they mattered. As the years passed, Emily and Walter became pillars of the community. Their company was no longer known just for its success, but for its heart, a business grounded in values. A place where compassion wasn't just a word, but a way of life. And still, Emily kept moving forward, one act of kindness at a time. They never just handed out charity. They offered something far more powerful: dignity, opportunity, and the belief that every person had the potential to rise. The young woman who once served coffee with tired hands and an unbreakable smile now stood beside David as an equal, a leader who inspired, uplifted, and gave without expecting anything in return. Even as the years passed and her role expanded, Claire never let success steal her humility. She remained the same woman who once gave a stranger a hot meal without hesitation, always grounded, always willing to roll up her sleeves to help wherever help was needed. Her journey had taught her that real wealth isn't counted in dollars, but in the lives we touch, the kindness we spread, and the hope we ignite in others. Eventually, Claire became a mentor, especially to young men and women who, like her once, had dreams that felt too far to reach. She shared her story not to shine a light on herself, but to remind others that a heart full of compassion and hands willing to work could take them farther than they'd ever imagined. And in their quieter moments, Claire and David would return to the little diner where their paths had first crossed. They'd sit by the window, sipping coffee in the same booth where a stranger had once asked for a meal. Those moments were never lost on them. Simple, sacred reminders of how everything had started with a single act of kindness. Together, they left behind a legacy, not of wealth, but of purpose. In one of their final joint efforts, Claire and David launched the Claire Foundation Scholarship, a program designed to help determined students from low-income families chase their dreams without the weight of financial chains. It was their way of passing the torch, of ensuring that compassion kept moving forward. On the day of the Foundation's first ceremony, Claire stood on stage before a crowd of young faces, many mirroring her own from years ago, hopeful, uncertain, and filled with quiet determination. She took a breath, held back tears, and shared her story. "If there's one thing I've learned," she said, her voice trembling with purpose, "it's that kindness, real, selfless kindness, can change everything. Don't ever underestimate the power of a small act. Sometimes, what you do for someone in a single moment can echo through their entire life. And remember, the richest people are not the ones with the most money, but those who give the most love." The audience rose in a standing ovation. as Claire looked out at the sea of smiling faces, then back at David standing beside her with pride in his eyes, she felt something she hadn't known in years: peace. David, too, had found something he hadn't realized he'd been missing: a renewed faith in humanity. Through Claire, he'd rediscovered what it meant to live not just richly, but meaningfully. And so, the girl from the diner became a beacon, not just of success, but of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of compassion. Her story, once quiet and tucked away in the corner of a local restaurant, had become a lighthouse for others, proof that kindness isn't weakness, and that every life, no matter how humble, holds the power to lift another. Thank you for being part of this incredible story. If this journey touched your heart, share it with someone who might need it today. And remember, sometimes the smallest act of kindness can create the biggest ripples.